This is my hobby, the greatest hobby. Hobbyist here, and we are on to the final character of our character exploration guide for the dungeon expansion. Now, the previous character which we covered was a character who I honestly believe is one of the best characters inside of this expansion, and just inside of Talisman in general, and the one that I've had the most favored and best playing experiences with. But this last character that I'm going to be covering, I honestly do believe that he is indeed a strong runner-up. So let's go ahead and get to that next character. Aside from the fact that he is probably one of the most far-removed characters when it comes to how close he is to the actual dungeon, this next character is an aloof and insightful scholar who shapes the ideas of those around him with his keenly honed intellect. Indeed, I am in reference to the Philosopher. So let's go ahead and get on to the Philosopher's character card here. So, the Philosopher has a strength of 2 and a craft of 4, which is a bit more on the basic side when it comes to characters and their stats. And as you can see, there's this black arch that's down towards the bottom. That is the symbol of the dungeon extension. Any cards, characters that are a part of the dungeon expansion are going to bear this logo, so it makes things easier for you when it comes to separating the dungeon expansion. Maybe if it's something that you're not particularly interested in. So that is definitely something that I find that comes in handy. But moving forward, he is a neutral character who starts in the city, which is why we have him where we do. He has a fate of 2 and an average life of 4, as well as 3 character abilities. So let's get into this first one here. You begin the game with 1 spell. Again, it's a bit more on the basic side. We already had the Gypsy who does that, plus the multitude of other characters that we talked about inside of our previous character of explorations. It's not out of the norm at this point to realize that characters are just going to have spells sometimes. But these next 2 abilities, honestly, they're very similar to the Prophetess, but they have different effects on things. So let's go ahead and get into that second character ability so I can show you what I mean by that. Whenever you land on face-up adventure cards, you may discard 1 card of your choice that you do not wish to encounter and draw another card to replace it, which you must encounter. So, it is very similar to the Prophetess, because the Prophetess's ability, if you don't remember from that video, is that she replaces any adventure cards that she draws. But with the Philosopher, it's any of the face-up adventure cards that are on the board. So, if we are inside of the actual dungeon itself, there are a ton of very dangerous traps, enemies, spirits, as well as, of course, a good handful of treasure. But especially in some of these spaces, there's 2 vault spaces that draw 3 cards from the dungeon deck. If you're fighting a multitude of enemies, or multiple enemies are converging on several spaces, then it might prove fruitful to you to simply replace the enemies that other characters haven't been able to defeat and take as trophies, in order to gain any objects instead, or to gain any weaker enemies that might benefit you more in regards to what it is that you need in order to succeed. Now, I did say adventure cards, so that is more so in reference to the dungeon deck, the woodland deck, the highland deck, and the city deck. Cards like the dragon expansion, draconic lord decks, and the harbinger cards do not count in the same regard as the prophetess's ability. So that is something to definitely keep in mind with the Philosopher. But, unlike the Prophetess, the Philosopher's ability extends even further, because whenever you draw a spell you do not wish to keep, you may discard it and draw another one to replace it, which you must keep. So you could do this immediately as soon as you get your beginning game spell. So if it's not the best spell in the world, because remember, you have 44 different possibilities with the 20 dungeon spells and the 24 base game spells. So if out of all those spells you find that it's not useful for yourself or useful in your current situation to use against other players, then being able to switch out right on the bat is definitely something that you can do. And because you're able to cycle through spells in this manner, you really open yourself up to finding the right spell combinations and finding whatever spells that you need in order to take on Lord of Darkness. Because this portion of the Philosopher's abilities suggests that craft is the way to go. If you don't remember from our base game tutorial video where we talked about how craft relates in conjunction with spells, with the Philosopher having 4 craft, he can carry 1 spell at a time. But if we open the doors to the city expansion and we use the Magic Emporium especially, then we can increase our spell count and increase our ability inside of craft and psychic combat to where we can start carrying more spells, to where the spells that we get as replacements we can throw off to the side and get new ones instead to better suit us for different combinations. Honestly, if you play your cards right, with the face-up enemies that you have, regardless of what region it may be in, of course, like I said before, the exceptions to the Dragon expansion and the Harbinger expansion, you essentially have the ability to make any strong enemies or any impossible areas to reach. Let's say there's an enemy that is covering a whole bunch of loot that you want to get your hands on, a whole bunch of followers, and that sort of thing. But if it's guarded by multiple spirits, or if it's guarded by multiple enemies, then maybe you might be able to switch those out for more objects, where you can start collecting even more loot. Or it could be weaker enemies that you can turn in for trophies, or for the wanted posters inside of the city. So now, you open yourself up to more opportunities because you're facing less and less danger. It is very similar in regards to how effective this is going to be for the Philosopher and how effective this is going to be in Talisman. Just note that you can't actually control what it is that's coming out of the dungeon deck because it is not what is currently face up on the dungeon deck board. But other than that, the Philosopher is a very solid character. So, I want to thank you guys as we are now reaching the conclusion of our character exploration for the dungeon expansion. And I will see you guys in the next one.